He looked at her across the room and saw nothing. A nobody. A quiet woman sitting alone at a table, nursing a glass of water while the rest of the crowd roared around her. He turned to his friends with that grin, that easy, untouchable grin, and said two words that would change his life forever. Easy money. He was the golden son of a martial arts empire, a fourth-degree black belt who had never lost a fight, never been told no, never had a reason to doubt himself. She was a music teacher from the south side of Chicago who hadn't stepped on a mat in nearly 9 years. He bet she wouldn't last 30 seconds. She lasted long enough to destroy everything he thought he knew. But that was only the beginning. Because the real fight, the one neither of them saw coming, had nothing to do with who could throw a punch. It had to do with the thing that terrified them both. Being truly, completely seen by someone who refused to look away. This is their story. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. And if this one hits you, and trust me, it will, drop a comment and tell me which moment broke you. Let's get into it. The warehouse on North Milwaukee Avenue had been transformed. What was usually a raw industrial space, exposed brick, steel beams, concrete floors stained with decades of Chicago rain, had been converted into something electric. Red and black banners hung from the rafters bearing the Ryu Combat Academy crest. A silver dragon curled around a fist. Temporary bleachers lined 3 sides of a regulation-sized mat. LED strips pulsed along the edges of the floor in slow, rhythmic waves, and the bass from the DJ booth near the entrance was low enough to talk over, but loud enough to feel in your chest. It was the 4th annual Ryu Foundation charity tournament, an invitational that had become one of the most talked about events in Chicago's martial arts community. Amateurs paired with amateurs. All proceeds went to after-school programs on the south and west sides. The press loved it, the sponsors loved it more, and at the center of it all, moving through the crowd like he owned not just the event but the air around it, was Sang-min Ryu, 29 years old. 4th Dan in Taekwondo. The eldest son and public face of the Ryu Combat Academy, a chain of 23 locations across the Midwest that his father, Dong-hyun Ryu, had built from a single storefront in Pilsen 30 years ago. Sang-min was the one they put on the billboards, the one who did the morning show interviews, the one whose highlight reel had 12 million views on YouTube. He was magnetic in the way that people who have never truly failed often are, generous with his smile, easy with his confidence, absolutely certain that every room he entered had been waiting for him. Tonight, he was in his element. Black dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms, moving between sponsors, slapping backs, remembering names. His 2 closest friends, Jae-won, who ran the Academy's marketing division, and Tae-hyuk, a real estate developer who had grown up with Sang-min in Lakeview, trailed behind him like satellites in an orbit they'd long stopped questioning. The amateur bouts were already underway. Most were clumsy, earnest, entertaining. A dentist from Evanston flailed wildly against a bartender from Logan Square while the crowd cheered them both on. A retired firefighter submitted a yoga instructor with a triangle choke that took 90 seconds and drew a standing ovation. It was all in good fun. Nobody got hurt. The real fighters, the ones who trained at Ryu, weren't competing. They were coaching, mentoring, spotting. The event was designed to be accessible, not dangerous. That was the whole point. And Sang-min loved it, not because it was charitable, but because it was theater, his stage, his kingdom made visible. Lyric Vaughn did not want to be here. She was 27, a music teacher at Langston Hughes Elementary on the south side, where she taught 4th and 5th graders how to read sheet music, how to hold a bow, how to find the note that lived between the ones on the page. She was good at it, patient, precise, quietly relentless in the way that the best teachers are. Her students adored her because she never raised her voice and always remembered their names. Outside of that classroom, Lyric's life was small by design. A 1-bedroom apartment in Bronzeville, a used Camry with a cracked taillight she kept meaning to fix. Saturday mornings at the Farmers Gamardier market on 61st Street. Sunday dinners at her mother's house, where she'd sit in her grandfather's old chair by the window and pretend the silence didn't feel like an open wound. Her best friend, Naomi Carter, had dragged her here tonight with the kind of cheerful, immovable determination that only a 15-year friendship could produce. Naomi was a physical therapist who treated half the fighters at Ryu's Wicker Park location. She knew this world. Lyric did not. Or rather, Lyric had known it once and had spent the better part of a decade trying to forget. "You need to get out," Naomi had said 3 days ago, standing in Lyric's kitchen with a flyer for the tournament in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "You need to exist somewhere, other than that school in your mother's dining room." "I exist plenty." "You exist like a ghost, Lyric. You're 27, and you live like you're 70. When's the last time you did something that scared you?" Lyric hadn't answered, because the honest answer, every single day, just getting through it, wasn't the kind of thing Naomi was asking about. So here she was, sitting at a high-top table near the back of the warehouse, watching strangers grapple on a mat while the music rattled her water glass, wondering how long she had to stay before she could leave without Naomi calling her a quitter. The answer, as it turned out, was not long at all, because Naomi had done something unforgivable. Naomi appeared at the table with 2 lanyards in her hand. "Don't be mad." Contestant badges, both of them printed with names. One read Naomi Carter. The other read Lyric Vaughn. Lyric stared at the badge like it was a live grenade. "No. It's a charity event. Amateurs only. You won't get hurt." I said no. "Lyric, you trained for 12 years. 12 years. You were a state champion at—" "I know what I was." The words came out harder than she intended, sharp enough to make Naomi flinch. Lyric looked away. The music was too loud. The lights were too bright. The mat. She could see it from here. The regulation blue, the give of the foam underneath, was too familiar. "I don't do that anymore. You know why?" Naomi sat down. Her voice softened. "I know why. And I also know that your grandfather wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life pretending that part of you doesn't exist." Silence. The kind that sits between 2 people who love each other enough to say the hard thing. "One bout." Naomi held up a finger. "Just one. 3 minutes. Then we leave, and I'll buy you the biggest plate of jollof rice in the city and never mention it again." Lyric picked up the badge. Her fingers were trembling, but her voice was steady. "One bout." Across the room, Sang-min noticed her for the first time. Not because she stood out. She was the opposite of standing out. She was quiet, contained, occupying the smallest possible version of the space around her. She was wearing jeans and a gray hoodie in a room full of athletic wear and branded merchandise. She looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong building and was too polite to leave. He turned to Jae-won and Tae-hyuk. They were 2 drinks in and loose enough to be honest. "See the woman in the gray hoodie, south side of the room." Jae-won looked. "What about her?" "She just picked up a contestant badge." Tae-hyuk laughed. "Her. She looks like she teaches Sunday school." Sang-min tilted his glass toward her. "Easy money. She won't last 30 seconds on the mat. Guaranteed." "You want to put something on that?" Tae-hyuk asked, already reaching for his wallet with the grin of a man who loved a sure thing. "Dinner at Oriole, loser pays. Done." They shook on it. Easy money. The easiest, Lyric's bout was scheduled 3rd from the end of the amateur card. Her opponent was a woman named Dara, a CrossFit enthusiast who had taken 6 months of kickboxing and was riding the adrenaline of her first live event. Dara was loud, bouncing on her toes, playing to the crowd. She threw her arms up when the announcer called her name, and the audience responded with the kind of indulgent applause reserved for enthusiastic beginners. Then they called Lyric's name. She walked to the edge of the mat, and something happened. It was invisible to almost everyone in the room. But if you knew what to look for, if you'd spent your life on mats like this one, you'd have seen it. The shift, the way her breathing changed when her bare feet touched the surface, the way her shoulders dropped, not from fear but from release, like a locked door finally swinging open. The way her hands hung at her sides, relaxed, fingers slightly curled, weight centered over the balls of her feet without her even thinking about it. 9 years. 9 years since she'd stood on a mat, and her body remembered everything. Naomi, watching from the edge of the bleachers, pressed her hand over her mouth. The referee signaled. Dara lunged forward with a wide, looping strike that had more enthusiasm than technique. Lyric sidestepped it like water flowing around a stone. Dara swung again. Lyric redirected her arm, slipped her hip underneath Dara's center of gravity, and executed a sweep so clean, so effortless, so textbook perfect that the entire front row went silent. Dara hit the mat. Lyric transitioned without a pause. Knee slide, side control, arm isolation. The whole sequence took maybe 4 seconds. She locked in an arm bar with the kind of quiet, surgical precision that doesn't come from 6 months of classes. It comes from a decade of training, from muscle memory so deep it lives in the bones. Dara tapped before the referee could even step forward. The room was quiet for exactly 1.5 seconds. Then it erupted. Lyric stood up. She didn't raise her arms. She didn't celebrate. She looked at her own hands like she wasn't sure they belonged to her, and then she walked off the mat without looking back. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. Not quite. Naomi was waiting for her at the edge. She didn't say anything. She just pulled Lyric into a hug so tight it could have cracked ribs, and Lyric buried her face in Naomi's shoulder and stood there, breathing, while the crowd around them roared for something they didn't understand. Across the room, Sang-min Ryu was not roaring. He was standing perfectly still, his drink forgotten in his hand, staring at the empty mat where a woman in a gray hoodie had just executed the cleanest amateur submission he had seen in 5 years of running this event. His mouth was slightly open. Jae-won was saying something. Probably something about dinner at Oriel. But Sang-min wasn't listening. He wasn't thinking about the bet. He wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about the look on her face when her feet touched the mat. That shift, that opening, like watching someone remember their own name after years of amnesia. Who the hell was she? Sang-min did not sleep that night. He lay in his penthouse apartment on the 42nd floor of a Lakeshore Drive high-rise, staring at the ceiling while the lights of Chicago's skyline painted slow patterns across the walls, and he replayed those 4 seconds over and over in his mind. The sidestep, the sweep, the transition, the lock. 4 seconds that had dismantled not just Dara, but something fundamental in his understanding of how the world worked. He was a 4th-degree black belt. He had trained since he was 5 years old. He could read a fighter from across the room, their stance, their weight distribution, their experience level, the way a musician reads sheet music. It was instinct. It was his gift. And he had looked at Lyric Vaughn and seen nothing. That was the part that kept him awake. Not that she was good. Good fighters were everywhere. It was that he had been wrong. Completely. Fundamentally. Embarrassingly wrong. He had looked at a state-level grappler and seen a Sunday school teacher, and the error wasn't in his eyes. It was in his assumptions. In the architecture of arrogance that he'd built so carefully he'd forgotten it was there. Easy money. The phrase tasted different now, like something spoiled. By Monday morning, he had her name from the registration forms. Lyric Vaughn, age 27. Emergency contact, Naomi Carter. That was all the form gave him. No gym affiliation, no martial arts background listed, just a name and a phone number he had no right to call. He called Naomi instead. She was, after all, a therapist who worked with his fighters. It was practically professional. "I'm not giving you her number." The words came before he even finished asking. "I just want to talk to her. About training. We have programs." "Sang-min, I've known you for 3 years. I've watched you charm your way through half the women in Wicker Park. My best friend is not a program, and she is definitely not interested in being charmed. I'm not trying to charm anyone. That's what makes you so good at it." A pause. "She's been through a lot. She doesn't need someone who treats people like puzzles to solve. That landed. He didn't call back. Instead, he did something he almost never did. He researched. Not the kind of research he was used to. Market analysis, brand positioning, competitor scouting. This was different. He searched amateur martial arts records in Illinois, scrolling through databases from the late 2010s until he found it. Lyric Vaughn, Illinois State Jiu-Jitsu Championship, 2016 and 2017. Gold medal both years in the women's featherweight division. Listed gym, Vaughn Martial Arts, 7834, South Cottage Grove Avenue. Vaughn Martial Arts. Not a franchise. Not a chain. A family name on a small building on the south side. He drove there on a Wednesday afternoon, telling himself it was curiosity, not obsession. The building was still standing. Barely. A narrow storefront wedged between a laundromat and a barber shop, its windows covered with plywood. Its sign, hand-painted, faded to ghosts, still legible if you knew what you were looking for. Vaughn Martial Arts. Discipline. Honor. Heart. Est. 1989. He parked across the street and stared at it for 20 minutes. He didn't know what he'd expected to find, but it wasn't this small, forgotten place that felt more like a memorial than a business. He thought about his father's empire. 23 locations, gleaming facilities, corporate sponsors. And then he thought about this place, where a woman had learned to fight so well that 9 years of rust couldn't dull the edge. Something about that comparison made him deeply uncomfortable, and he couldn't figure out why. He found Lyric by accident. Or rather, he found her because Chicago, for all its size, is a city of neighborhoods, and neighborhoods have rhythms. He started going to a coffee shop in Bronzeville. Not hers, but close enough to her orbit that their paths crossed on a Saturday morning 2 weeks after the tournament. She was sitting at a corner table with a stack of sheet music and a cup of tea, a pen tucked behind her ear, mouthing notes silently as she marked the pages. He almost didn't recognize her, not because she looked different, but because she looked the same. That same quiet containment, that same deliberate smallness. The woman who had dismantled an opponent in 4 seconds was sitting in a coffee shop arranging Vivaldi for 10-year-olds, and the contradiction was so stark it made his chest tight. He bought his coffee. He sat 2 tables away. He pretended to check his phone. He lasted approximately 4 minutes before he spoke. "You're Lyric, from the tournament." She looked up. Her expression wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm either. It was the look of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to go. "And you're Sangmin Ryu. Your name is on the building. You know who I am. Everyone at that event knew who you were. You made sure of it." She went back to her sheet music. "Can I help you with something?" The dismissal was so clean it almost made him smile. Almost. "I wanted to say that what you did on that mat was a mistake." He blinked. "A mistake. I shouldn't have been there. My friend signed me up without asking. I did 1 bout and I left. I don't do that anymore." "Do what? Win?" The look she gave him could have frozen Lake Michigan in July. "Compete, fight, any of it. I teach music, that's what I do. With hands that can lock an armbar like that. With hands that can play a cello, which is what they're for now." She gathered her papers, her tea, her pen. She was leaving. He was losing her, and for reasons he couldn't articulate. That felt catastrophic. "Your grandfather's dojang." The words came out too fast, before he could stop himself. "On Cottage Grove. You trained there." She stopped. Everything about her went still. Not the relaxed stillness of the mat, but the brittle stillness of something about to break. "How do you know about that?" "I looked you up, after the tournament. I found your competition records, and the gym was listed, 'You looked me up.' It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. I was curious. I was a woman at your event, and you lost a bet on me, and now you're curious." She turned to face him fully, and for the first time, He saw it. Not anger, not hostility, but something much worse. Exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of someone who has been looked at her whole life and never once been seen. Jumun, do you want to know what I think about your curiosity? I think you're a man who's used to understanding everything and everyone around him, and when something doesn't fit into your neat little categories, you can't rest until you figured it out and filed it away. I'm not a puzzle, sang Min, and I'm not easy money. She knew about the bet. Someone had told her. Maybe Naomi. Maybe someone who overheard. And she knew. He stood there in the coffee shop, holding his overpriced latte, watching her walk out the door, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Shame. Not the superficial kind, not embarrassment, not wounded pride. Real shame. The kind that sits in your stomach like a stone and makes you look at yourself with the lights on. He had reduced her to entertainment, to a punchline, to a line on a bet that he'd made without a single thought about who she actually was. Easy money. He wanted to go back in time and slap the glass out of his own hand. He didn't chase her. He went home, sat in his apartment, and for the first time in his adult life, asked himself a question he'd been avoiding since he was old enough to understand what his last name meant. What have I actually earned? The answer, when it came, was devastating in its simplicity. Nothing. 3 weeks passed. He threw himself into work, the academy, the foundation, the meetings with his father's business partners that he usually treated as performances. But something had shifted. He noticed things he'd never noticed before. The way his father's associates talked about the South Side, like it was a market to be captured, not a place where people lived. The way the Academy's expansion plans were always moving outward, always consuming, never asking what was already there. He started driving through neighborhoods he'd never spent time in. Not Lyric's neighborhood, he wasn't a stalker, whatever she might think, but neighborhoods like it. Places with hand-painted signs and buildings that held decades of someone's life in their walls. He didn't know what he was looking for. He just knew that the version of Chicago he'd been living in, the skyline version, the penthouse version, the brand deal version, was missing something essential, and the absence was starting to feel like a lie. On a Thursday evening in early July, he walked into a community center on the west side that ran a free after-school program. No cameras, no branded gear, no entourage. Just him, a pair of sweats, and a willingness to hold pads for 12-year-olds who wanted to learn how to throw a proper roundhouse kick. The kids didn't know his name. The program director, a retired boxer named Earl, looked at him sideways for about 10 minutes, then handed him a pair of focus mitts. Make yourself useful. He went back the next Thursday, and the one after that. He didn't tell anyone. Not Jae-won, not Tae-hyuk, not his father. It was the first thing he had done in years that existed purely because it was right, not because it was strategic, and the feeling was so unfamiliar it nearly knocked the wind out of him. That was where Lyric found him. She was there to drop off donated instruments, 3 recorders, a dented trumpet, and a violin that had seen better decades. For the center's music program, which shared space with the boxing program on alternating afternoons. She walked in with a cardboard box in her arms, saw him kneeling on the gym floor tying a kid's boxing glove, and stopped dead in the doorway. He looked up. Their eyes met across a room that smelled like floor wax and sweat and old dreams, and neither of them said a word for a long, suspended moment. Then the kid whose glove he was tying looked up at him. "Mister, you're doing it wrong." And the moment broke, and Lyric laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. A real laugh, not polite, not restrained, sudden and bright and completely unguarded. It changed everything about the room. "You're doing it wrong," she confirmed, setting the box down and crossing to him. She knelt, took the kid's glove, and tied it with the kind of practiced ease that comes from years of doing exactly this thing in exactly this kind of place. "You have to loop it under first, or it'll slip when they throw. You box too. My grandfather taught boxing and jiu-jitsu. I grew up tying gloves before I could tie my own shoes." It was the first real thing she had ever told him. Not a deflection, not a dismissal, a fact, offered freely, and he received it like a gift he wasn't sure he deserved. They didn't become friends that day, but they stopped being strangers. Over the next 3 weeks, their schedules overlapped at the community center often enough that the overlap stopped feeling accidental. He came on Thursdays for the boxing program. She came on alternating Tuesdays and Thursdays for the music program. When their days collided, they'd end up in the same hallway, or the same break room, or sitting on the same bench outside while Earl locked up. She was guarded, but she wasn't cruel. When she talked, she was precise, thoughtful, occasionally funny in a way that caught him off guard. Dry observations delivered with such a straight face that he'd be 3 sentences past the joke before it hit him. She listened more than she spoke. But when she spoke, every word was chosen. He learned her in pieces. Her grandfather, James Vaughn, had opened the dojang in 1989 after 20 years in the army. He taught jujitsu and boxing to anyone who walked through the door. Kids, adults, ex-offenders, single mothers, anyone. The dojang was never profitable. It survived on James Vaughn's military pension and the stubborn refusal of a man who believed that discipline could save lives if you taught it with love. Lyric had trained there from the age of 7. She was James's shadow, his protégé, the one who inherited his patience and his technique, and his quiet, immovable belief that strength wasn't about power. It was about knowing exactly where to put it. James Vaughn died on a Saturday in November 2017. A stroke, sudden and merciless. He was 68 years old. Lyric was 19. She stopped fighting the same week, closed the dojang, packed his belts into a box and put them in the back of her closet, enrolled in the music education program at DePaul University, and built a new life, a smaller life, a quieter life, a life in which the thing she loved most couldn't remind her of the person she had lost. She told Sang-min this on a warm evening in July, sitting on the bench outside the community center, watching the sun drop behind the rooftops of the west side. She told it plainly, without drama, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had carried this weight for so long it had become part of her posture. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't try to fix it. He just sat there, next to her, and let the silence hold the weight she'd put down. It was, she would realize much later, the first time someone had done that. By the 3rd week of July, Sang-min Ryu was in trouble, and he knew it. He knew it because he was thinking about a woman, more than he was thinking about the quarterly revenue projections his father had asked for. He knew it because he'd started listening to Vivaldi, specifically the cello suites, on his morning runs along the lakeshore, and every time the low notes swelled, he thought of her hands on the sheet music in that coffee shop. He knew it because Jae-won had asked him 3 times if he was feeling okay, and Tae-hyuk had straight up asked him if he'd been abducted and replaced by a more thoughtful alien. You turned down courtside seats to go volunteer at a gym on the west side. Tae-hyuk was incredulous. Who are you? Someone who's trying to be better than what I was. Since when do you care about being better? Since a woman in a gray hoodie made him realize that being impressive and being good were 2 entirely different things. But the trouble wasn't just that he was falling for Lyric. The trouble was that Lyric was not falling for him. Or if she was fighting it with every tool in her considerable arsenal. She maintained distance with an expertise that bordered on martial arts in itself. She was warm enough to keep him close, guarded enough to keep him out. She'd laugh at his jokes but deflect every personal question. She'd meet his eyes across the community center and then look away before the moment could become anything. She existed in the exact space between yes and no, and he was starting to understand that this wasn't a game. This was survival. She had lost the person she loved most in the world, and she had responded by making herself unreachable, because you can't lose what you never let yourself have. He understood this because he was starting to recognize the same architecture in himself. Sang-min Ryu had never lost a fight. He had also never been in one that mattered. His entire life, the belts, the trophies, the sponsorships, the penthouse, was a highlight reel of victories that cost him nothing. His father had handed him a kingdom, and instead of building something of his own, He'd spent 10 years performing the role of heir, never once stepping outside the script. Lyric was the first thing that wasn't in the script. She didn't care about his name, his money, his record. She responded to the version of him that showed up in sweats to tie kids on boxing gloves, the version that didn't perform, didn't posture, didn't have a brand strategy. And that version of him, the one she seemed to almost trust, was also the version his father had spent decades dismissing. The confrontation with Dong-hyun came on a Friday afternoon in late July, in the glass-walled office on the 40th floor of the Ryu Properties building downtown. Dong-hyun Ryu was 63 years old and had the bearing of a man who had punched his way out of poverty and never quite stopped swinging. He had emigrated from Busan at 22 with a black belt, $400, and a conviction that America owed him nothing, and he would take everything anyway. The Ryu Combat Academy was his monument, not to martial arts, but to willpower. Every location, every franchise agreement, every branded protein shake was proof that Dong-hyun Ryu had bent the world to his specifications. His son, in his estimation, was soft. Talented, yes. Photogenic, certainly. But soft. A face for the brand, not a backbone for the business. The quarterly projections, Dong-hyun said without looking up from his desk. You're late. I've been busy. Busy. The word came out flat, unimpressed. Doing what? I hear you've been volunteering at a community center, tying children's shoes. News traveled fast in the Ryu orbit. Sang-min felt his jaw tighten. Boxing gloves, actually. Is this a phase? Or are you making a statement? Maybe I'm just trying to do something that matters. Dong-hyun finally looked up. His gaze was steady, appraising, utterly devoid of warmth. Everything you do matters, Sang-min. You carry this family's name. When you play at being humble in a neighborhood gym, you are making a statement about this family's brand. Do you understand that? Maybe the brand isn't the most important thing in the world. The silence that followed was the kind that reshapes rooms. Dong-hyun set his pen down with the deliberate precision of a man who has practiced controlling his temper for 40 years. The brand, Dong-hyun's voice dropped, is the only reason you have the luxury of pretending it doesn't matter. Sang-min left without delivering the projections. He drove to the community center, but it was closed. He sat in his car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel, breathing through the fury and the fear and the thing underneath both of them that he didn't have a name for yet. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize. Earl gave me your number. I hope that's okay. The kids have a showcase next Thursday and they want you there. Lyric. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, I'll be there. The showcase was held in the community center's multi-purpose room on Thursday, July 30th. Folding chairs arranged in rows. A portable speaker playing walkout music for the boxing demonstrations. A corner stage set up for the music students, where Lyric's kids would perform after the fights. Sang-min sat in the second row and watched 12-year-olds throw combinations he'd taught them, and felt something crack open in his chest that he'd been keeping sealed for years. Pride, not the performative kind, not the kind that shows up on camera, but the deep, aching kind that comes from knowing you helped someone become something they didn't think they could be. Then Lyric students took the stage, 6 kids with instruments they'd barely had for 2 months, playing a simplified arrangement of Pachelbel's canon that was technically imperfect and emotionally devastating. Lyric stood off to the side, conducting with small, precise gestures, her face luminous with a joy so pure it almost hurt to look at. After the showcase, the room emptied slowly. Parents taking photos, kids comparing notes, Earl shaking hands and looking like a man who had been reminded why he got into this work in the first place. Sang-min found Lyric in the hallway, packing up instrument cases. He picked up the dented trumpet without being asked, and placed it in its case with the care of someone handling something precious. Your kids were amazing. They were. She was smiling. A real, unguarded, full wattage smile that did something irreversible to his cardiovascular system. Well, they've only been playing for 8 weeks. Most of them had never touched an instrument before. You gave them that. I gave them access. They did the rest. He wanted to kiss her. The want was so sudden and so total that it took his breath away. He didn't. He stood in that hallway, holding a dented trumpet case, and let the wanting exist without acting on it. And it was the hardest discipline he had ever practiced. Sang-min. Her voice was different now. Softer. The walls were still there, but they were thinner, translucent. He could see through them. Why do you keep coming here? Because this is the only place where I feel like myself. Which self? The one who hasn't figured it out yet. The one who's still trying. She studied him for a long moment. He let her look. No performance, no deflection. Just himself, standing in a hallway, dented trumpet in hand, telling the truth. My grandfather would have liked you. A pause. This version of you. What about you? Do you like this version? A pause. I'm getting there. They walked out together. The night air was thick with summer. Cicadas, car radios, the distant rumble of the L. He carried the instruments to her car. She let him. They stood in the parking lot, surrounded by Chicago's endless, electric hum, and the space between them felt like something holy. Not a gap, but a bridge. Not yet crossed. Waiting. Good night, Sang-min. Good night, Lyric. She got in her car. He watched her drive away. And standing there, in the parking lot of a community center on the west side of Chicago, the heir to a martial arts empire, and a man who had never felt poorer, Sang-min Ryu understood something with absolute clarity. He was in love. And it was the first thing in his life that wasn't easy. August arrived with a heat wave that pressed down on Chicago like a hand. The lake shimmered. The sidewalks radiated. People moved through the city in slow motion, conserving energy, waiting for the weather to break. For Sang-min and Lyric, August was the month of almost. Almost touching, almost confessing, almost becoming something that had a name. They circled each other with the caution of two people who understood, instinctively, that what was building between them was too big for carelessness. He brought her coffee on Tuesdays, a specific order he'd memorized without asking. She texted him articles about martial arts pedagogy that she thought he'd find interesting, and he read every single one. They sat closer on the bench outside the community center. Their conversations ran longer, went deeper, touched places that neither of them showed to anyone else. He told her about his father, about the weight of a name that felt more like a leash than a legacy, about the hollow center of a life that looked perfect from the outside and felt like a performance from within. She told him about the year after her grandfather died. The silence, the grief, the way she'd dismantled her own identity piece by piece until she fit into a shape that couldn't remind her of what she'd lost. I made myself small. On purpose. Because small things don't get noticed, and things that don't get noticed don't get taken away. And now? Now there's a man with a 4th-degree black belt bringing me coffee and reading articles about music education, and I don't know what to do with that. You could let it happen. I don't know how to let things happen, Sang-min. I only know how to control them or avoid them. Then let's figure it out together. We're both terrible at this. We can be terrible at this together. She laughed. That laugh, sudden, bright, unguarded. The one that dismantled him every time. You're not as smooth as you think you are. I'm not trying to be smooth. I'm trying to be honest. It's much harder. The first time he kissed her was on a Wednesday evening in the first week of August, in the parking lot of the community center, under a sky that couldn't decide between orange and violet. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was careful, tentative, terrified. The kind of kiss you give someone when you understand that this moment could ruin you. and you're doing it anyway because the alternative is worse." She kissed him back, and then she pulled away, and her eyes were wet, and the words came out barely above a whisper. "Don't break this. I won't. You don't know that. I know that I will try harder not to break this than I have ever tried at anything." 2 weeks later, she found the document. It happened the way these things always happen. Not with a dramatic reveal, but with a quiet, accidental, devastating discovery that recontextualizes everything. Lyric's mother, Denise Vaughn, had been receiving letters for months. Official letters from a development group called Lakefront Urban Partners regarding the property at 7834 South Cottage Grove Avenue, the building that had once been Vaughn Martial Arts. The dojang had been closed since 2017, but the Vaughn family still owned the building. Denise had been paying property taxes on it for 9 years, holding on to it the way you hold on to the last piece of someone you've lost, knowing it's impractical and unable to let go. The letters were acquisition offers, polite at first, then insistent, then accompanied by legal language about eminent domain considerations and zoning reclassification. Lakefront Urban Partners wanted the entire block for a mixed-use development, condos, retail, a branded fitness center on the ground floor. Denise had been ignoring the letters. She hadn't told Lyric because she didn't want to add weight to a burden her daughter already carried. But in mid-August, she showed them to Lyric because the latest one contained a name that Denise recognized from the news. The branded fitness center planned for the development was a Ryu Combat Academy location. Lyric read the letter 3 times. She sat at her mother's kitchen table, in her grandfather's chair, with the Chicago sun pouring through the window, and she read the name RYU 3 times, and each time, a different layer of the last 2 months peeled away to reveal something raw and terrible underneath. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She folded the letter with precise, steady hands, placed it on the table, and looked at her mother with eyes that had gone completely flat. "How long has this been going on?" "Since January, but Lyric." "Since January. He's known me since June. He's been coming around since June." "You don't know that he knew about..." "His family's company is trying to demolish Grandpa's dojang and build their gym on top of it. And he's been..." She stopped, swallowed, started again. "He's been bringing me coffee, reading my articles, kissing me in parking lots. And the whole time..." "You don't know the whole time." "I know enough." She drove to his building. Not to the penthouse, to the lobby, where she told the doorman to call up and say that Lyric Vaughn was here, and that if Sangmin Ryu had any decency left, he would come downstairs. He came down in 3 minutes. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweats. No shoes. He looked like he'd been sleeping, or trying to. When he saw her face, whatever warmth had been in his expression drained away, replaced by something cold and knowing, like a man who had always been waiting for this moment and had just been hoping it wouldn't come. Cottage Grove. 1 word, 2 syllables, an address and an accusation. His jaw tightened. Lyric. "Did you know, when you came to the coffee shop, when you started showing up at the center, when you asked about my grandfather, did you know that your family was trying to demolish his building?" The lobby was empty, except for the doorman, who had suddenly become very interested in his computer screen. The marble floors gleamed. The chandeliers hummed. Everything was beautiful and cold and wrong. "Not at first," Sangmin said. "Not when I came to the coffee shop. I swear to you, I didn't know. But you found out." "Yes." "When?" He closed his eyes. 3 weeks ago. My father mentioned the Cottage Grove acquisition in a meeting. I recognized the address from the competition records. 3 weeks. Her voice was so steady it was terrifying. "You've known for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of bringing me coffee and sitting on that bench and telling me about your father and kissing me, and you said nothing. I was trying to figure out how to what? How to tell me that everything you've been building with me was happening on top of everything your family is trying to destroy." That's not what this is. That's not what we are. What are we, Sang-min? Tell me. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a man who bet against me before he even knew my name, and when that didn't work, found another way to win. The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually stepped back. You think this was a strategy? You think Lyric, listen to me. What I feel for you has nothing to do with my father's business. I came to that community center because I wanted to be a better person, not because of easy money. She let the words fall quietly, almost to herself, and the phrase, his careless, arrogant, two-word summary of everything he thought she was, landed between them like a grenade that had been waiting to go off for 2 months. He had no defense, not against the truth. The desperation broke through, reaching for something to offer her that wasn't an excuse. I'm going to fight the acquisition. I've already started looking into the legal options. You can stop. You can stop right there. She was backing toward the door, and every step felt like a canyon opening between them. I don't need you to save my grandfather's building, Sang-min. I don't need you to fight your father for me. I don't need you at all. That's the thing you never understood. From the moment you saw me, all you've been doing is deciding what I need. First, I needed to lose. Then I needed to be figured out. Then I needed to be pursued. Then I needed to be saved. And not once, did you ask me what I actually wanted. She turned and walked out. The glass doors of the lobby caught the late August light and threw it across the marble in sharp, golden blades that looked like they could cut. Sang-min stood there for a long time after she left. The doorman didn't say a word. The lobby hummed its expensive, empty hum. He went back upstairs, sat on the floor of his penthouse with his back against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and looked out at the city, the whole sprawling, impossible city, and understood with crushing clarity that he had just lost the only thing he had ever truly wanted. And the worst part, the part that sat in his stomach like a stone and wouldn't move, was that she was right. About every single word. September. The heat broke. Chicago exhaled. The lake turned from glass to steel, and the leaves on the trees along Michigan Avenue began their slow, annual surrender. Sang-min Ryu did not call Lyric Vaughn. He did not text her, drive past her apartment, show up at the community center, or use any of the 100 avenues available to a man with his resources to insert himself back into her life. He did the one thing that felt most unnatural to him, the thing that required more discipline than any belt or tournament had ever demanded. He respected her decision. And then he went to war. The first meeting with the legal team happened on September 3rd, a Thursday, in a conference room he'd rented in a building that had no connection to Ryu Properties. He hired a real estate attorney named Grace Kim, sharp, independent, no ties to his father's network, and told her everything. The Cottage Grove property, the Vaughn family, the acquisition plan, Lakefront Urban Partners, and its relationship to Ryu Properties through a web of LLCs and holding companies that his father had designed specifically to keep the Ryu name off the paperwork. Grace reviewed the documents. So your father structured it to be invisible. My father structures everything to be invisible. That's how he operates. You never see the fist until it lands. And you want to stop the acquisition. I want to buy the Vaughn family enough time and legal leverage to refuse the sale if they choose to. I want the eminent domain argument neutralized, and I want to find out if there's a way to purchase the property myself, outright, so it's off the table entirely. Grace studied him. This will cost you, not just money. Your father will view this as a betrayal. My father views everything I do as either an extension of his will or a betrayal. I've spent 29 years trying to be the first one. I'm done. The legal battle took 3 weeks. It was ugly, technical, and fought almost entirely in silence. Paperwork, filings, counter-filings, a chess game played in conference rooms and county clerk offices while the rest of the world went about its business. Grace was excellent. She found irregularities in the zoning reclassification process. procedural shortcuts that lakefront urban partners had taken, public comment periods that had been quietly shortened, community impact assessments that had been filed but never actually conducted. The case wasn't a slam dunk, but it was enough. Enough to slow the process. Enough to create legal exposure that made the acquisition more expensive than it was worth. Enough to give the Vaughn family options they hadn't had before. But that was the quiet war. The loud one came on September 25th. Dong-hyun Ryu called his son to the office. Not for a meeting, for a confrontation. He had found out about Grace Kim, about the filings, about the counter-strategy his own son was running against one of his most lucrative development projects. The office was the same glass-walled room on the 40th floor, but it felt different now, smaller. The view of the city that Sang-min had once found impressive now looked like a map of everything his father wanted to own. Dong-hyun was standing when Sang-min walked in, not sitting behind the desk, standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the skyline with the rigid posture of a man who had built all of this and was watching it be threatened by the one person he never expected. Tell me this isn't what I think it is. I can't tell you that, because it is. Dong-hyun turned. His face was controlled, but his eyes were furnaces. You hired an attorney to undermine a Ryu Properties project. My project. Your inheritance. I hired an attorney to protect a family's property from a predatory acquisition process that your company designed to bypass their right to refuse. Their right to refuse. Dong-hyun repeated the phrase like it was spoken in a foreign language. That building has been empty for 9 years. The owner, some old veteran's daughter, pays property taxes on a boarded-up storefront out of sentiment. We offered her above market value. She refused because she can't let go of a dead man's hobby. The word landed like a slap. Hobby. That dead man's hobby taught a 19-year-old girl to become a state champion. His voice was steady, but something underneath it was shaking. That dead man spent 30 years teaching discipline and honor to people in a neighborhood that your company looks at and sees nothing but a revenue opportunity. His name is still on the building, and his granddaughter still feels his presence every time she walks past it. That's not sentiment. That's a legacy. Something you should understand, given how much you expect me to carry yours. Silence. The glass walls of the office reflected the city back on itself, a city watching its own argument. This is about the girl. Dong-hyun's voice was quiet now, quiet and dangerous. This entire thing, the volunteering, the legal games, this performance of conscience, it's about a girl. Her name is Lyric, and no, it's not about her. Not entirely. It's about the fact that I've spent my entire life inside a machine that you built, doing exactly what you designed me to do, and I never once stopped to ask whether the machine was pointed in the right direction. He took a breath. I'm asking now. And the answer? The answer is that I don't want to build an empire that only grows by eating things that are smaller than it. I don't want to carry a name that people fear instead of respect. I don't want to win fights that were rigged before they started. Dong-hyun stared at his son for a long time. The furnace in his eyes didn't go out, but something behind it, something older, something that might have been pride or might have been grief, flickered. If you do this, you are on your own. No position, no equity, no safety net. I know. You will lose everything I built for you. I know that too. And you're choosing this anyway. Sang-min looked at his father, really looked at him, past the power and the posture, past the decades of discipline and control, and saw something he had never let himself see before. A man who was afraid. Not of losing money, not of losing a deal. Afraid of losing his son. Afraid that the one thing he couldn't control with contracts and leverage and willpower was the human being he had created. I'm not choosing against you, Sang-min said. I'm choosing for myself. For the first time. He left the office. He did not look back. The next 72 hours were a controlled demolition of his old life. He resigned from his position at Ryu Combat Academy. A formal letter, hand-delivered, carbon-copied to the board. He moved his personal assets, money he'd earned from endorsements and investments, not family money, into a separate account. He called Grace Kim and authorized the purchase offer for the Cottage Grove property, using his own funds, at a price that would cover the Vaughn family's property taxes for the next decade and then some. Then he called Denise Vaughn. He introduced himself, told her what he'd done, and asked for nothing in return. No gratitude, no relationship, no connection to her daughter. He explained that the property was protected, that the acquisition pressure would stop, and that the building was hers to do with as she chose. Keep it, sell it, reopen it, let it stand. Her choice. Her family's legacy. Not his to decide. Denise was quiet for a long time. Then her voice softened. You're the one she's been crying about. Sangmin closed his eyes. I'm the one who made her cry. Yes. She doesn't cry easily. My daughter, she holds things. She holds everything. She hasn't cried like this since her grandfather died. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be worthy of it. If she let you close enough to hurt her, it means she let you closer than she's let anyone in 9 years. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Yes, ma'am. Good. Now I'm going to hang up, and I'm going to tell my daughter what you did. And whatever happens after that is between you and her and God. Are we clear? Crystal clear. Denise hung up. Sangmin sat in his newly bare apartment. He'd already begun the process of selling the penthouse, trading down for something smaller, something earned, and waited. Not for a call, not for a text, not for a resolution. He waited because waiting, real waiting, the kind where you don't know the outcome and can't control it and have to sit with the uncertainty, was the fight worth having. The one that didn't come with a belt or a trophy. The one where the only opponent was the version of yourself that wanted to take the easy way out. Easy money. He'd spent his whole life chasing it. Now he was learning what the hard money cost. October 11th. A Saturday. Chicago in its glory. The trees along the boulevards burning gold and copper. The sky that particular shade of Midwestern blue that makes you believe the world might be a forgivable place. The building at 7834 South Cottage Grove Avenue had been cleaned, painted, and brought back from the dead. Not renovated. The walls were still the same walls, the floor still the same floor, but revived. The plywood was gone from the windows. New glass let the light pour in. The hand-painted sign had been restored by a local artist who specialized in historical preservation, and it gleamed in the autumn sunlight. Vaughn Martial Arts. Discipline. Honor. Heart. Est. 1989. The grand reopening was Denise Vaughn's idea. Lyric had resisted at first. She was good at resisting. But her mother had a way of making things happen through sheer persistence and the strategic deployment of guilt. Your grandfather didn't build that dojang for it to sit there looking pretty. He built it so people could walk through the door and become something they didn't think they could be. Now open the door, baby. Lyric opened the door. The turnout was larger than anyone expected. Kids from the South Side who had heard about the free classes. Parents who remembered training with James Vaughn decades ago. Earl brought his boxing kids from the West Side Community Center, and they came through the door like a tiny, loud army, already arguing about who was going to learn the first throw. Naomi was there, of course. Standing by the refreshments table, watching her best friend move through the dojang with a lightness she hadn't seen in 9 years. Lyric was wearing her grandfather's GI top, white, faded, too big in the shoulders, over her own training pants, and she moved through the space like she was relearning the geography of a country she'd left as a child. She taught the first class at 10 o'clock in the morning. Basic jujitsu. 12 students, ages 8 to 14, lined up on the mat in borrowed jizz. She stood in front of them and felt the weight of her grandfather's presence in the room. Not as grief, not as absence, but as something warm and steady and permanent. He was in the walls, in the floor, in the muscle memory of her own body as she demonstrated the first technique, a simple hip escape that she had learned at age 7 from a man who believed that the best way to teach strength was with patience. The most important thing in martial arts, she told the class, is not how hard you can hit. It's knowing when to move, when to hold, and when to let go. She believed it this time. He came at noon. She was between classes, sitting on the bench outside the dojang, a new bench, placed in the exact spot where her grandfather used to sit after Saturday morning sessions. When she looked up and saw him walking down Cottage Grove Avenue, he was wearing jeans and a plain white t-shirt, no branded gear, no entourage. His hands were in his pockets, and he walked with the uncertain posture of a man who wasn't sure he was welcome, but had decided to show up anyway, because sometimes showing up is the whole fight. He stopped about 10 feet from the bench, close enough to speak, far enough to leave. Your mom told me about the opening. My mom talks too much. Your mom told me you've been teaching all morning, that the kids love you. The kids don't know any better yet. A silence, but not the loaded, weaponized silence of the lobby. Something different. Something that had weather in it, wind and change, and the possibility of clearing. I left the company, sold the penthouse. I'm in a 1-bedroom in Pilsen now, near the original Ryu location, the one my father opened in '96. He paused. I'm starting a foundation, youth martial arts, free programs, no branding, no franchise model, just teaching, like your grandfather did. She looked at him, really looked at him. The way she'd looked at him that first day on the mat, reading him with the precision of someone who had been trained to see what was really there, not what was being performed. You gave up everything. I gave up everything that wasn't mine to begin with. The rest. He gestured vaguely at himself, at the street, at the messy, uncertain, wide-open future that stretched out in front of him like an unmarked mat. The rest, I'm building. From scratch. From scratch. She stood up, crossed the distance between them, those 10 feet that had felt like a canyon, until she was standing close enough to touch. You called me easy money. I did. That was the worst read you've ever made. It was the worst read anyone has ever made in the history of reading people. She almost smiled. Almost. And I'm not going to make this easy for you. I know. I'm going to be difficult, and guarded, and slow to trust, and I'm going to test you, and doubt you, and make you earn every single inch of ground. I know that too. And you're choosing this anyway. He looked at her, this quiet, extraordinary, formidable woman who had dismantled him from the first moment he was foolish enough to underestimate her, and said the truest thing he had ever said. And there's nothing easy about you, Lyric Vaughn, and I'm done looking for easy. She took his hand. Not dramatically, not cinematically, the way you take someone's hand when you've decided to walk somewhere together and you don't know the way. Come inside. The afternoon class starts in 20 minutes. I could use someone to help tie the kids' gloves. I've been told I do it wrong. You do. I'll teach you. They walked into the dojang together. The sunlight followed them through the door, and the sign above them, discipline, honor, heart, caught the light and held it. Inside, the mat was waiting. Clean, blue, open, ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in a very long time, so were they. The end.